Well, good afternoon, church. I hope everyone is doing well this afternoon and know that we are praying that God is with you. For this rendition of Fireside Chat, I have a good friend, Ryan Strebeck, with me. We went to seminary together, got to know each other a lot better that way. Some of you in New Mexico may know his dad, Sid Strebeck. He is our conference lay leader, so don't hold that against Ryan by any means. And Ryan is now the pastor in Sweetwater, Texas, at the First Methodist Church there. And Ryan, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hey, Dustin. Thanks for inviting me on. Great to see your face and see your family there. Glad y'all are in Ruidoso and doing the work that you're doing. So, yeah, Dustin and I had a great chance to get to know each other when we were at Asbury together, and a lot of respect for you and your family, and really appreciate what y'all do. So, yeah, we're here in Sweetwater, just kind of holding down the fort like everybody else under semi-quarantine and trying to look at church and discipleship and all that stuff a little differently as we're kind of relating to each other in more fluid ways. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, one of the things that I thought of while we were talking is we took one of my favorite seminary classes together, Rural Ethics and Moral Concerns with Thobaven, and basically it was you tour Kentucky, Tennessee, and Ohio, and we took a class and we actually toured a bourbon distillery together and got told that if we drank there, we would automatically get an F and probably kicked out of seminary. So that was a fun experience.
I think they just told you that. I didn't ever get that instruction. Yeah. We were just talking about that the other day because we watched with our high school daughter the movie Harriet, and about the Underground Railroad. And we remember when we went to the museum there in Cincinnati. Hey, Dustin, I think I lost your audio there, man. Is that me?
No, that was me.
Okay, there you go.
So sorry about that. We have a few audio technical things on occasion, so that's why my wife is standing in the background just to make sure it doesn't come out again.
Hi, Ashley.
Hi.
This is off the beaten path, sorry, church, but when Ashley and I were not even married yet, we were interviewed by KJTV 34 in Lubbock about tech parking, and she just stood next to me the whole time, and she did not speak a single word, and I did all the talking. So it's been like that in our relationship for a while.
There you go.
But what we're going to do today is I'm going to read through, we're going to go through Philippians 2:12 to 18, and we'll just pause at a certain few points and talk a little bit about what it means, how it applies to our lives, how it applies to the churches that we're in. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Awesome. So I'm reading from the NRSV today. I don't know what version you're in, so just if there's a little difference, that's where we're at.
Sounds good.
All right, I'll start in verse 12. Therefore, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed me, not only in my presence, but much more now in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who is at work in you, enabling you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. And just that phrase, like, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Like, what is Paul getting at here, Ryan?
Oh man, that's a great question. You know, this is one of those very memorable portions of the letter, the working out our salvation with fear and trembling. And while at the onset, some Protestants might say, gosh, that sounds like work salvation or something. But of course it's not. It's not what Paul's saying. He's been saying all through the letter that the way that we're saved and the way that we relate to God is through belief, and God is the primary actor in the relationship. And he's talking, of course, to the whole church that's already being faithful. So he's encouraging them to continue to, keep up the good work. We see what you're doing. You're giving me joy because of all the work that you're doing in ministry. And so much of it's about, living in a different way from the world that he's talking about. He's going, the world is just off the rails. And you guys are shining as a light in the midst of that world that's gone off the rails. And so don't forget that you have that vocation, that's your job. The church is a city on a hill, and you can't be hidden. So when you live this way, the world is going to notice, and that's how people are drawn to Christ. And, he holds up the image of Christ in the Philippians 2 at the beginning. This is the great hymn of the one who gave his life so we could have life. So it's that salvation is just it's the recurring energy. There's a couple of points in there where it's talking about our will and God's will, and it's the same word where we get the English word energy. So God is pouring his energy into us, and it's sort of merging with our energy, and we're drawing energy from God, and we're giving energy with our own will. And it's this just back and forth thing about God is working in us and through us for his good pleasure, but it's his good pleasure for us, for the church. And so there's a lot of circular talk here where, we might say as Wesleyans, a lot of people want to have Bible studies and get down on issues like this, and they develop an either or dialectic, and we say a lot, we hear a lot of both and in Wesley's language and in our history as Anglican background, and so we're working out the salvation that we've received, and it is work, but the energy for that work comes from God.
Yeah, I think that's a great, bringing our Wesleyan background into it. That's kind of what I think of when working out your salvation with fear and trembling, is that it's, there's God's prevenient grace that goes before us, his justifying grace that saves us, and his sanctifying grace, that sanctification process. And I think that's kind of what Paul's hitting at here, is that we're not done yet, right? I mean, just because we have degrees from Asbury Theological Seminary does not mean that like our salvation is done and we have arrived and we have completed the course. And Paul's not just saying it for the individuals, but he's saying it to the church, right? The church is, you're not good enough. You're not quite there yet. You need to continue to work out what God is doing in you. Continue to be, like you said, be that presence, that light on the hill, and let God to work in you. And that's, to me, that's one of the things that dumbfounds me about who our God is that he comes to us. We don't necessarily just go to him, but he sends his son, he sends his spirit. He is, as Timothy Tennant would say, a missional God who continually sends himself to us. And that's how he works in us. And it just, man, it's amazing.
Yeah, that's good. I think about, a lot of our hymns, a lot of our great hymns really try to address this issue of what is it about our will that is involved in following Jesus. So think about even the, I have a charge to keep, or we think about I have decided to follow Jesus. And even those songs wrestle with the fact that when we make a decision to grow in virtue, to work out our salvation, that the minute we start thinking, man, I had some good energy here, I've really done some work, we realize, oh, God was already here, and I've just now caught up. God's drawing me into, he's drawing me into greater fruit and greater knowledge of him, and then there's just this thing that happens, this miracle of the resurrection, which is, I was talking to the church last week about how, the old metaphor of planting a seed in the ground is really a good one for resurrection life. As salvation is being born in us, there are a lot of times in that process of something growing where it doesn't look like anything's happening. And then you walk out one day and there's a ripe tomato, and you go, my gosh, but there's been, weeks and weeks and weeks of development that have led to that, and soil preparation and everything else. So it's really it's a fascinating thing to watch in our own lives. And we see it, in our churches, we see it as churches work together, and we see it in our friends and family as they live in the world. So it's a lot of fun when you think about it that way.
It is. I love that example. I mean, and I'm a West Texas boy too. You're from New Mexico originally, and I'm West Texas, and it's funny, we're serving in different states now. But, that's working on the farm, always having a garden. That's just an excellent image and metaphor for who we are, as that dead seed that comes to life and sprouts new fruit. And Jesus says, the successful person will 30 times, 60 times, 100 times will be the seed that takes root. And that's who God's calling the churches to be here. So thanks for bringing that out. All right, I'm just going to read a couple of verses, 14 and 15, then I'm going to pause because I don't know about you sometimes, but verse 14 is hard for me. Do all things without murmuring and arguing, so that you can be blameless and innocent children of God, without blemish in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, in which you shine like stars in the world. And that's just, hard for us. How do we do things without grumbling and complaining all the time?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. Great question. I'm really tempted to argue with you right now, just for fun. Just,
Gonna
but
complain about the question?
yeah, argue about the question. Um, you know, yeah, that's just a really strict. I mean, that's a sharp commandment, right? Do these things and don't do it with grumbling and fighting and making, majoring in the minors or whatever we want to say. That's a really, I think that's probably a hard word for all of us. It's a hard word for me. It's a great reminder that I'm a part of something larger and greater. And that's a good reminder to me when I read these letters, is that Paul is always speaking, it's y'all. He's saying y'all, not you.
Yeah.
We've sometimes in American Christianity, we read these letters like it's just about me. It's my individual salvation project, which Paul cares very much about, and so does Christ. But these are communities that are wrestling with this. So he's talking to the whole community. So at any point, you might have 85% of your community that's firing on all cylinders, and the grumbling and disputing is happening in the 15%. And 2 years later, that 15% has changed, and it's different people. So we mature, we grow up, and that's part of the beauty of we've all been in churches with people that have gone through transformations, and they used to drive us crazy. And now they're some of our, best leaders. And we have been those people that have driven other people crazy. And then we've come through growing up in sanctification and, gone to counseling, and we quit being jerks. And so whatever those things are in our lives. And I think that you're right. It's a really hard one. And it goes back to that deal where, the world is, we shouldn't be surprised by the world's atrocities. I mean, the people do horrible things to each other. And we look right now at the, child abuse statistics and mental health stuff, that all the things that are happening, just the things that people do to one another when they're stuck in quarantine. And so, as people who love our children and model that and defer to others, that's going to shine like light in a culture where all you're seeing on the news is, oh yeah, here's another statistic, here's another thing. So it's a great opportunity that we have.
Yeah, and Paul talking to the church in Philippi, he's saying if you're going to be this difference to the world, if you're going to let God to work through you, then you don't complain and grumble about each other. Plain and simple. And I mean, I know that's not easy for us to do, because my natural tendency is to look at the negative. My wife's sitting over there like, yep, that's right. Is to look at the negative and be like, man, well, this should be better, or that should be better, or this should be working better. And we've both been pastored. I mean, I started pastoring in 2004. You started doing youth ministry way before then. And it's easy for churches to get into the grumbling, complaining mood. But if we really step back and see what Christ is doing and how Christ is working in the life of the congregation here now, I always, Paul says in Colossians 3, this is just a verse that's been hit on me recently lately, is, we set our minds on things above. So if we're keeping our mind on Christ and what he's doing, then it's easier to kind of live that sort of lifestyle. And it's hard, sometimes it's hard for me to look at heaven and what God is doing and who the ascended Christ is, as opposed to just looking at the crap of the world and saying, man, it's pretty stinky.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a great point. I was thinking back to the earlier part of this chapter when you were talking about how it really is part of our conversion to take on a new mindset. I mean, we actually get a new mind. I mean, our mind, and it goes back to loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And, Paul's saying earlier, have the same mind and that Christ Jesus had. So part of our conversion is a total transformation of the way that we think, the way that we look at the world, and the way that we engage the world. The scriptures invite us to consider God's mind. I mean, what is going on in the mind of God? And part of that is, he's always creating. The resurrection is something that comes from the mind of God, I think. And so our minds are going through a conversation a conversion. Well, I guess a conversation and a conversion. Yeah. And we're seeing, we're looking for ways to bring resurrection into whichever environment we're in. And it's back to, you mentioned the farm analogy, and you can look at these things and don't grumble, don't dispute and all that. And we could look at those things as maybe pulling weeds. And a lot of times we spend a lot of time pulling weeds and we don't plant anything. And so we're not seeing that get choked out by a life that we are encouraging and developing. So it's not surprising. We should expect some grumbling and disputing and some all that stuff. And so, rather than stalling out and focusing our entire operation on, well, let's eliminate grumbling and disputing, it's like, let's go on to the stuff we're supposed to be doing. And those things will, we'll cast those things off as we kind of fight through this stuff.
Yeah, we deal with them when they come up and when they arise, but we don't focus on just, if somebody doesn't like the shirt that I'm wearing today or the fact that I shaved my beard off, I'm not going to just like cast them out of the church. Well, that's grumbling and complaining. You get out of here. But it's doing things for the good of the kingdom of God, I think is what he's getting at. Going to keep on reading. I'm going to go 16 to 18, and we're going to stop at 18 today. It says this. It says, "It is by holding fast to the word of life that I can boast on the day of Christ, that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. But even if I am being poured out as a libation over the sacrifice and an offering for your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. And in the same way, you also must be glad and rejoice with me."
Yeah.
NRSV puts a libation. ESV says drink offering. A couple other translations say different things. And what is Paul talking about here, like being poured out like a libation or a drink offering?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. I thought you were going to answer that. You're the biblical scholar here. Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, and I think the obviously he's using imagery that they're familiar with of a liquid offering, something that's a way of being pouring yourself out where all is being emptied. I think that's the image there. He's saying I'm being poured out as an offering, a full offering. I mean, here I am in prison, and he's like, I don't know if I'm going to make it through this alive or if I'm not. Either way, I've got to reckon with the fact that my life is an offering, and I'm finding joy in that because I see your lives out there living for Christ, and that's bringing me joy. And so as I'm being poured out, he's inviting the church to see their, I think, suffering and their struggle against some of these challenges and oppositional forces in the world. And he's saying, you need to conceive that as an offering. I'm being poured out as an offering. Y'all are being poured out as an offering, and that's going to bring us a sort of mutual joy. That even as we suffer for Christ, there will be an element of rejoicing in that because we've been counted worthy to be, to bear the name Christ in the world.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see. This is St. Francis of Assisi right there.
Oh yeah.
And I just think about his life as one of suffering and joy, and about how he renounced the riches of the world and purposefully chose to live the monastic lifestyle. And I think that's kind of what Paul's getting at, is like in the midst of the suffering, he's under house arrest. He's, earlier in the book, he's debated, should I live? Should I die? Both are good options for me right now, which, how many people in our world are walking around, I could live and that's good, or I could die and that's even better. Paul's saying that, and he's saying, like, look, I'm being poured out. I'm suffering right now. But because of you, church, I have joy. And man, I think that I just love that word for the church is we should be a place where we bring one another that much joy, where we're willing to sacrifice and surrender what we have so that we know, so that I know that Ryan is being lifted up in Sweetwater, because man, Ryan does a great job in ministry, and he's a person I look forward to talking to and catching up with every time we get the chance to. That's the type of joy that Paul wants for our churches, I think. Not the place, where if you contradict it, going back to verse 14, not the place where you go there and you're like, if I go to church just one more time, there's going to be so much murmuring and backbiting. So.
Yeah, well, that's good. And I think just to carry on that logic a little bit, I think the word here for, he's referring to like the pouring out or the sacrifice of your faith. I believe that's the word liturgia, where we get the word liturgy. So we think liturgy, we think inside the church building. This is us reading prayers together in liturgical way. But I think Paul is kind of expanding our understanding of the liturgy here and saying, when you're serving Christ in the world, you're participating in the liturgy of the church. The church is enacting its work by living as an offering in the world. You know, they're being held up as people who don't bring about change by going through the ordinary channels of power and pressure. But they're bringing about life by, well, what did Jesus do? He made himself nothing, you know, and he laid down his life for the sake of others. And so we're offering our lives as a sacrifice to, not just for the heck of it. We're not just trying to beat ourselves up. We're not masochists. We're doing it because we out of love for God, and we want others to have life. And so this is the way that it works. Parenting is a great example. And you look at what has to happen in the life of a family to bring life to children. You're offering your lives as a living sacrifice. You're being poured out. But the whole purpose is to bring life. It's not just because we like to get beat up. It's because we want to bring life. So, Christians endure things, and it should be to bring life and you mentioned joy. I do think that should be a part of it. And so sometimes we lose sight of the goal, and it's easy, even people who have done all the right things and do really good work for the kingdom, it's very natural for us to lose joy in that process.
Yeah, and I just think of Paul's words in Thessalonians, be joyful in all things, or give thanks in all things, pray continuously, give thanks in all circumstances. And just that rejoice always that he says there. I messed it up because, I'm not that great of a biblical scholar. Rejoice always, give thanks, or pray continuously and give thanks in all things. That's what it says in 2 Thessalonians 5. And the life that Paul lived, like the pain, the suffering, the tribulation, being whipped, being in prison, being shipwrecked, being afloat at sea. And he's like, look, man, we can rejoice in everything. And I know a lot of us, I don't know about your church people, but I know a lot of our church people are suffering. Staying home's not good for us. Churches or businesses are closing down. People's mental health and spiritual health are being extended. And I just think Paul's a great person to look at during this time, because he knows what it's like to go through crap and to come out of it and be able to rejoice in it.
Yeah, so that's good. That's good.
Well, you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom for us?
No, sir. I think that's what I saw there. So you've covered it really well. It's a great text. I love what you're doing there. So it's fun. I look forward to the rest of the conversations.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Ryan. We both went to Tech, even though we were a few years separated. I don't know if you ever saw Chris Beard's Fireside Chats that he did, but that's kind of where I got the idea. I was like, hey, if Chris Beard can do it, I can do it. And my goal is one day for Chris Beard to give me some sort of shout out, or, maybe join me. I don't know if he's even a Christian, but we'll get there.
That's the difference between me and you, Dustin. See, I like to see that, and I go, okay, well, Chris Beard did that, and so I probably shouldn't do it. And you go, well, if he can do it, I can do it. So I love to see you haven't lost your confidence. That's good.
See, I see it as like I have no creativity, so I'm just going to copy what other people are doing because it's working for them.
That's good.
So, well, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today. I truly appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you in person at some point in the near future, hopefully, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, see you, Dustin. Bye, Ashley. Love you guys.
Thanks.
Bye.